Before we begin, a couple of points. First, if you haven't seen this movie before, stop watching now. Don't watch another thing about Phantasm. Just go and see it. The less you know about this film, the better it is on the first viewing, and spoilers are this film's kryptonite. Seriously, just go and buy it. It's totally worth it because it's a bloody good film. Secondly, spoilers from here on out. Consider that a warning. Finally, I feel the need to clarify that this film is not a vampire movie. I don't think it is a vampire movie. I'm not trying to convince people that it is in any way a vampire movie. If I was being very liberal with reality, I'd be tempted to suggest this may involve space vampires to some degree, but we'll get to the meat and gravy of this in a bit. After the cult success of Count Yorga, the floodgates kind of opened on the idea of the modern vampire. The idea of taking this ancient creature of the night that's lived for centuries and preyed on the innocent and dropping them squarely in a modern-day progressive setting. While Yorga would pretty much be the first to attempt the idea, throughout the 1970s it would be tried again and again, refining the concept to a point where it was hard to imagine a time when vampires were solely relegated to the late 18th and early 19th centuries in film form. Films like Blackula, The Night Stalker and Martin all began to take the vampiric mythos and more fully integrate them into a modern setting. The 70s in many ways was one of the most interesting times for vampires in general, because there was a real cultural shift away from the cape-wearing, pale, handsome, ghoulish archetypes of Lugosi and Lee, and more of a shift towards modern or muted fashions of the time. The idea was that these vampires needed to be better integrated into society rather than looking like they'd been dressed by Liberace. Simply because how were they supposed to blend into the background and get on with sucking blood and hypnotising servants when they stood out like a sore thumb against the fashions of the modern day? In many ways, it was a much-needed adaptation for the flares and t-shirt age. By the end of the 70s, the transformation had become complete, and the idea that anyone could realistically be a vampire had become the movie's new hot take. It added an extra layer to films by giving it a slight whodunit veneer, and it kept viewers guessing right up until the reveal. It also allowed filmmakers to keep increasing the gore, violence and eroticism incrementally for the most part of the decade. Unusually, the film that probably did the most to help further shape what vampire films of the 1980s would look like wasn't actually strictly a vampire film in its own right. Phantasm is a 1979 surrealist horror film written and directed by Don Coscarelli, a man who by many measuring sticks is a terrifically well-respected and somewhat underappreciated filmmaker in this humble critic's opinion. He's probably best known for the Phantasm series, but he's also written Beastmaster, which I mentioned briefly in my B-movie reviews video, and Bubba Hotep. He tends to be a writer-director on most of the projects he's worked on, and he's had quite a limited run on actual projects themselves, which is surprising given how well he makes movies. The plot? Well, the film takes place in what should be modern-day 1979 suburban America, as we follow Michael, an early mid-teens kid who I must say here is surprisingly realistically written. Michael's parents have recently died, and his drifter older brother Jody has come back to town to look after Michael and attend the funeral of his friend Tommy, who's believed to have committed suicide, though really he was murdered in a graveyard by a mysterious woman. Michael drinks, can fix cars, and rides a motorbike. He's also obsessed with the idea that Jody is going to leave him forever, so he follows him everywhere he goes from the shadows. When he sneaks into Tommy's funeral while Jody and his friend Reggie are attending, Michael discovers something very strange. While hiding in the bushes, he sees an overly tall, strange-looking man walk over to Tommy's casket, pick it up whole, and load it into the back of the hearse by himself. The general atmosphere of the man and the strangeness of the scene makes Tommy go to seek advice from a local psychic, who traps his hand in a strange box which appears out of thin air and teaches him the mantra, "Don't fear, it's all in your mind." Jody, meanwhile, takes some downtime with Reggie, and he reveals that he's planning on possibly taking Michael to go and live with his aunt, and that he intends to leave town again as soon as possible. Later that evening, Jody, with Michael shadowing him, goes out to a bar and meets a girl, who turns out to be the same woman who killed Tommy. She takes him back to the graveyard for good time bouncy bouncy. Michael follows and pervs a little bit, but he's distracted by a rustling and strange noises in some nearby bushes, which reveals itself to be some kind of demonic dwarf. He screams and runs off, which causes Jody to chase after him, and by the time the situation's been resolved, the mystery woman has disappeared. After this, Michael is haunted by dreams of the tall man, and later that day encounters him on the street. After this incident, he decides to visit the graveyard's mausoleum to try and get to the bottom of things, where he's grabbed by one of the tall man's assistants, who ultimately ends up being utterly decimated by an orb. The tall man tries to get Michael, but only succeeds in having a finger cut off, which Michael takes to Jody as proof that something strange is happening. With Jody and Reggie on board, things slowly begin to spiral out of control as the strange world the tall man inhabits is revealed, and we find out why all of the coffins in the graveyard are so much lighter than they should be. I've mentioned a few times that Phantasm isn't a vampire movie, and it isn't, strictly speaking. However, there are a lot of themes, tones and elements that do heavily borrow from vampire mythos throughout the film. And these themes would go on to effectively drag vampires kicking and screaming into the 1980s. Symbolically, fangs are everywhere in this film, as is blood. The look and feel of the tall man is that of a hybrid between the cape-wearing Lugosi Lee era Dracula and Nosferatu, though grounded much more in 70s and 80s sensibilities. There are several almost hypnotised henchmen throughout the film who do the tall man's bidding, driven by his mental powers. There are women who, while not strictly lovers, are used to lure people to an area where the tall man can take them. The tall man himself seems to have some degree of psychic powers, including hypnotism and the ability to teleport or travel long distances almost instantly. He also seems to have control of several familiars or demon creatures, and he's existed for centuries doing whatever the hell it is he's ultimately trying to do. The reality is, while this film doesn't deal with vampires directly, it's so steeped in its mythos and is such an ultimately bizarre and unforgettable film that without it I don't think we would have films like Fright Night, One Dark Night, or even The Lost Boys. Or at least they would look and feel a fraction of the way that they do. In fact, it wouldn't really take much to make this movie a vampire film. Though personally I am happy with it being quite hazy on the origins of the tall man, as I think, like Pinhead in the Hellraiser series, the less you know, the better he is. In many ways it was pretty much the final step to date of the modernisation of vampiric lore, indirectly offering filmmakers for the next 20 years an effective blueprint of how to subtly do vampires. This is also one of the first films to show a possible future idea for vampire movies, the integration of technology into the arsenal, in the form of the Phantasm spheres, strange orbs which, while only briefly shown here, are absolutely tenacious and ruthless in coring their unfortunate victims. All round, this is a brilliant film. The Direction and Cine work in tandem here to really deliver a fully fleshed out and well-rounded visual experience, with some really decent compositional shots and an eye for direction that really helps build an isolationist experience. There's an overhanging sense of dread throughout, and none of the motives of the tall man and his helpers are ever made explicitly clear. It very much feels throughout that any crumbs we manage to extract in regards to what exactly is going on is just the tip of the iceberg as to what is actually occurring here. And in doing so, they've managed to utilise the Cinean direction to help actually tell the story, rather than just letting the script roll through the exposition, which would have been a much easier option. Only helping the Cinean direction, the set designs are lavish, grand, and have a sharpness to them. The mausoleum in particular is very intimidating, and the use of composition, particularly in the wide shots, gives the set design a feeling of impending incident that really can't be shaken. Even now, nearly a full day after watching this movie, I still have incredibly vivid and slightly haunting images of those corridors in my mind. That's not to say, though, that the mausoleum is the only good set design implemented here. Michael's house, the psychic's house, the antique store, all of these scenes have a ridiculous attention to detail on their set designs. And with the joy of Blu-ray technology, it's possible to gain a greater sense of character depth by seeing the houses they keep, the items they cherish, and even subtle things just resting in the background. Topping this all off is some absolutely blinding use of lighting. They've gone down the shadowed route, which here works tremendously as it really gives the sharp and angled set designs even more definition and menace, and quite literally casts a shadow over the majority of the film. I'm genuinely impressed by the pure attention to every facet of the filmmaking process on this side of things. I can't say it's perfect. There are a couple of effect shots that by modern standards don't really land and look a bit silly, but I'd be an absolute Grinch if I picked one or two blink and you'll miss it examples to bash this film. 97% of it looks bloody gorgeous. The soundtrack sounds great too. It's eerie, semi-electronic strangeness. A little bit prog, a little bit goblin, and totally immersive to the experience. I feel the film would be a lot paler an experience without its booming whumps and relentless droning tones to increase the unearthliness of the production. It's also nice to see what I believe to be a relatively small-budgeted, $300,000 of money from the time if you're interested, movie have crisply recorded dialogue. With smaller budgeted productions, audio is usually the first thing to go south. But there's nothing like that here. Script-wise, we have a really tight plot that straddles the line between telling a deeply mysterious story with twists and turns, and enough horror elements to keep me in suspense while simultaneously being surreal enough in places to keep me hooked during the more dialogue-heavy exchanges. Honestly, I don't think 10 minutes goes by in this film without something weird or critical happening, which is great. From the opening titles to the end credits, I was absolutely hooked. And only further helping matters is the fact that this film is seemingly just the right side of self-aware. It has funny moments in places, it has little nudges and winks, which for the late 70s is quite a fresh take, given that horror movies of the mid to late 70s tended to be in two flavours: straight horror or all-out camp farce horror. The performances themselves were brilliant also, with Angus Scrimm being quite frankly terrifying as the tall man, this alien-like impression on our world with unclear motives, an unnerving presence, and a genuinely unpleasant atmosphere hanging around him. It feels almost like he landed on this planet the day of the auditions, and he's easily one of the most watchable elements of this film. Every scene he's in is just mesmerising, utterly mesmerising. Michael Baldwin also has to be praised as Michael in this. I wasn't kidding earlier when I said he's arguably one of the more realistic portrayals of a young adult that I've seen in any 70s or 80s film like this. While on surface level he's dependent on his brother, the film more than shows he's a capable adult, with maybe just a touch more growing to do. The development of his character through Phantasm is brilliant and really shows a true dedication and understanding of a person of that age. Nothing comes easy for him, and by the end of the movie, while there's still room for him to grow, you feel like he's really learned a lot from his experiences. In fact, almost all the characters in this feel pretty well-rounded. With the possible exception of Tommy, who's a bit of a MacGuffin ultimately, It feels like every character who appears in this film has some kind of detailed backstory, history, or narrative to help push the film along as it goes. No one just exists in Phantasm, and that's a good thing. Finally, I have to mention the frankly quite wonderful editing present. Tying the whole thing together, we have some very functional, at times quite inspired cuts. It's overall a tight production. This film doesn't waste any time. It tells the story it needs to tell, has enough mystery to keep you hooked and enough horror to keep you on the edge of your seat. It's a tidy, clean edit that does the job well and really lets me appreciate the effort that went into all the facets of this film's production. Phantasm really is one of those films that I think has hit me at just about the right time in my life. I think had I watched this any earlier, I wouldn't really have appreciated its more subtle elements. Any later, and I think I probably would have wondered what all the fuss was about. But what we have here is nothing short of a modern masterpiece. A unique viewing experience that genuinely entertained and amused me thoroughly. And I highly recommend you seek this one out. Arrow Video quite recently remastered all 4 films in a lovely presentation box, which I can definitely recommend tracking down if you have the chance. If not, it's also available as a standalone release too. Not only is the restoration gorgeous, but there's a pretty comprehensive set of special features in the package as well. When it comes to vampires, modern cinema has a lot to thank this film for. It took the Yorga formula to its logical conclusion and effectively made it okay for films like Fright Night to adapt vampire mythology to a younger, more modern audience without getting bogged down by capes, castles and counts. While not a vampire film, and I'm sure you're all as fed up as I am of saying that, it plays on the elements of vampirism in a way that no other film had attempted before. In that sense, it's revolutionary. But next week, we'll see a prime example of where that breakthrough leads to as we close off the Halloween season with a hard mid-80s steer. Till next time.